How is your realtor getting paid? There's an awful lot of talk out there in the media and many other places that are talking about how are listing brokers getting paid? How are buyer brokers getting paid? Is it right? Is it wrong? Well, there's a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of things that those that are the enemy of the real estate industry are pushing out in the media and causing a lot of confusion. There is no doubt that right now we are embarking onto the biggest change in the real estate industry in really several decades, okay? But what I wanted to do is jump on here and talk to you all about how has compensation been getting paid, and one of the methods that will be used moving forward by many companies, and I think all companies as we get 6 to 12 months from now. So let me show you how things have been for several years. This is the home seller here. Most of the time, home sellers, when they were selling their home on the open market, hiring a realtor, they were paying a listing broker, okay? And the listing broker was taking, usually, as long as the seller agreed, a portion of that commission, and they were paying a buyer broker, or really the buyer's brokerage, okay? Now, the way that many companies are doing it, Lamacchia Realty included, is we're saying, you know what? Since there's so much talk and so many arguments about broker-to-broker compensation, and there's so much criticism of it, even though the settlement doesn't directly say it can't be done, we've chosen, and many other companies have chosen, to eliminate this step and instead have the seller pay directly to the buyer brokerage. So seller would pay listing brokerage, seller would pay buyer brokerage for many different companies and many different transactions moving forward. Now, does this make the old way of doing business bad? Does this screw anything up or throw shade at anyone? I don't think so. I don't think the way that it was done before was wrong. But moving forward, there are some companies like mine that are going for that added level of protection where we're just going to say, okay, when we're representing a seller and the seller chooses to offer out compensation, whether it's proactively or if it happens during a negotiation and the seller says, sure, I'll pay the buyer's brokerage for bringing that buyer to me, or pay the buyer's broker because the buyer is asking me to do that within the transaction, fine. When we're on the listing side, we're going to say, sure, no problem. Here's the documents, here's the forms, here's the contracts, here's the language. Seller will pay directly, and seller will pay listing brokerage directly. And then on the flip side, when we're representing buyer, okay, we'll be saying, if there is an offering of compensation from the listing brokerage, we'll say, hey, thanks for the offer. We don't want to accept it from the listing brokerage. Instead, we want it directly from the seller. Now, from a buyer and seller's point of view, I know some of you are thinking, well, how does this affect me? Well, there's not really a huge impact on you, and I don't really think it's necessarily negative or positive on you, the client. But it's something that you need to be aware of. And remember, this is under circumstances that the seller agrees to either proactively offer compensation or agrees within a negotiation. There will be cases that buyer will pay buyer brokerage, or buyer may request a closing cost credit from seller and use a portion of that or all of that towards paying their broker. Or there might be a combination of the two. In some of this, for those of you that have signed listing agreements already that had co-broking in them, there might need to be some amount of, call it renegotiation or change of terms at the time that the contract comes together. That's for listing brokers and sellers to negotiate and handle on their own, and that's for buyers and buyers brokers to handle on their own. But while we're in this interim period, there will be some times that some of these negotiations will have to happen. And that's why I've also and adjustments to contracts and terms. That's why I've also talked about amendments. It's very likely that sellers will be getting approached by their listing broker right now, or at some point in the next few weeks or the last few weeks, about signing an amendment to the existing contract. Same for buyers. If you're a buyer and you had signed an agreement with your buyer's agent, they may be approaching you about some type of amendment. This is normal. We're in a time right now where there's a lot of fluctuation in the way that things are happening. It's a fluid situation, it's changing, and it's going to take some time for these things to get ironed out. Bottom line for buyers and sellers, and that's who I'm talking to in this video, is just go about it with an attitude of, hey, if you're a buyer, you want to achieve a home on the best terms that you possibly can. You're a seller, you want to sell your home at the best terms that you possibly can, and work with your realtor. Make sure to find the right one, more important than ever to do that. But work with them to make that happen. I hope that makes sense. I hope this illustration makes it a little bit more clear. That's all. Good luck. Happy home buying and selling.